Good morning.
This is Cynthia Swan. I'm not quite sure where we are in the program because my system locked and froze on me and dropped me off. But I would like to take this opportunity to make certain that we acknowledge and give an opportunity to President-elect C.K. Hoffler to have an opportunity to speak about a very important individual who is going to join us and lend us his expertise and influence on this topic. Thank you so much.
Can't hear you, CK. CK, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. My name is C.K. Hoffler, and I am, as people have said, the president-elect of the National Bar Association. I also chair the election protection effort for Madam President Alfreda Robinson. This has been really an incredible journey for me. I've always, for the past 30 years at least, been in the election space, in the voting rights space as a lawyer, but to chair it for our extraordinary organization has been indeed an honor for Madam President. I do have the pleasure of introducing, and he's going to join us, I don't know with technology at what point, but I have the pleasure of introducing someone who really needs no introduction, and that's the Reverend Jesse Jackson. When we were going to have our conference, our Gertrude Rush conference in Atlanta, we had planned a robust election protection series of seminars and training and CLEs for the NBA lawyers and other participants. And we had asked Reverend Jesse Jackson, Congressman John Lewis, Ambassador Andy Young, and Zanona Clayton, the four remaining pillars, if you will, of Dr. King, who were there with him during the civil rights movement and who have meant so much to this country, to give the NBA lawyers our charge to go out and protect the right to vote. Well, we weren't able to have Gertrude Rush, but that didn't stop our momentum. And so Reverend Jackson is here today to bring us greetings, brief greetings, and to give us our charge as well. I don't know if he's on the line yet, but if he's not on the line, I think we should continue the program. And when he's able to come in, maybe we could integrate him into our program since he is giving brief remarks. So against that backdrop, I guess, Madam Moderator, I will push the program back to you because I don't think just Reverend Jackson has joined us. I don't hear him on the line, but when he does join us, and I'm going to send a text to see where he is, then we can perhaps integrate him in the program and play.
Okay. Well, meanwhile, we will go on, and thank you so much, Madam President-elect. We'll go on with the program with opening comments, and we will begin those comments with Kristen Clark, who serves as President and Executive Director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, which is one of the nation's most important national civil rights organizations in the pursuit of equal justice for all. We are going to have very brief bios at this point because we do have a very full program for you, but I will encourage you following these very brief bios that you look up these very esteemed panelists and you will come to realize just how important and how influential and how necessary they are in this fight. So Kristen, please give us your comments.
Cynthia, this is Marcia of the Lawyers Committee. I'm afraid Kristen is having some trouble logging in. So can we move on, please? And then hopefully she'll be able to get on later. Sorry about that.
Okay. So then we will now have comments by Judith Brown Dianas, who has served as a lawyer, professor, and civil rights advocate in the Movement for Racial Justice. She leads the work of the Advancement Project's National Office in combating structural racism in education, voting, policing, criminal justice, and immigration. I think that we're going to find that Kristen has had such an extensive background in the areas that we are most interested in is in the Black community, and I look forward to her comments at this time.
I believe Reverend Jackson is on the line now. I'm told that he is joining us as well.
Oh, do you want to go to him first? We could do that.
Reverend Jackson, are you on the line? Well, why don't you go forward? I received a text that he is on the line, but we can't hear him. So why don't we continue the program? And then we're able to... Thank
Good
you.
morning, everyone. My name is Judith Brown Dianis again, and I am Executive Director of the National Office of Advancement Project. I'm really honored to be here with you all today to discuss the issues of voting rights. Since the 2000 election in Florida Advancement Project, which opened our doors in 1999, has been doing voter protection work. It was there in Florida that we realized that we can't wait until after an election to fix the cracks in our democracy. And so our voter protection program has been operating across the country, supporting grassroots organizations. And what I want to say to you in this moment is that we need all hands on deck when it comes to voting rights. That we know that COVID-19 has exposed structural racism for those who didn't know that it existed or how it played out, but it also exacerbated it for Black communities in particular. We also know that we have an election coming up where the stakes are high. That COVID-19, if we connect the dots to all of those structures that have been broken for our country, that this election, you know, I hate to say it, like we always say that this election is the most important election of our lives, but I'm going to say that it is. Because there is so much at stake about the direction of our country, the recovery and reconstruction for our communities. And so participation in this election is very important, but there are a lot of people who understand how high the stakes are. And some of those people would prefer for Black folks to not be able to engage and to vote. And they would like to limit participation and make voting harder for people. And so our job as Black lawyers is to protect our folks, to make sure that we are on the front lines, because voting may be very different this time around. We know, as was already mentioned, that President Trump has already started to think about retaliation against states that want to go to vote by mail by taking their federal funds. And that's because he understands, and he's actually made these comments, that vote by mail may hurt his reelection chances. He understands that a lot of people may participate if voting is convenient. And so not only at the federal level, but at the state level, we are seeing attacks. We right now have a case in Florida where we sued right before the primary in order to make sure that we could extend the deadlines for absentee ballots, because at the end of the day, no one should have to put their health at risk in order to exercise their right to vote. And so the work ahead of us is to make sure that we push back on states that make it harder, that don't allow vote by mail, but that our people also have options around voting. And there's going to be a big fight. We're seeing COVID-19 voting rights cases in many states because there are some states that don't want to make it convenient. They don't want to give us options. They don't want to increase early voting. They don't want to make sure that there are enough polling places for our people to vote. Right now in Georgia, I just talked to folks in Georgia this morning, they're already seeing 2-hour lines for people who decided that they wanted to vote in person. So Black lawyers, it's really important that we roll up our sleeves, that we get on the front lines, because our people need to see us representing them. Judges need to see us representing the voting rights community. And we also have information about how our communities are and how they will engage. So I hope that all of you will take up the charge, that you will join this, that you will join election protection and organizations like Advancement Project who are on the front lines, supporting our communities to ensure that they have the right to vote. Thank you.
Judith, thank you so much for those comments. It's my understanding that Kristen Clark is on the line at this point. Kristen, are you there?
Yes. Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Pleasure and an honor to be here. I want to thank the National Bar Association for convening us and bringing us together. 2020 marks what will undoubtedly be one of the most consequential elections of our time. I'm so proud to partner with President Robinson and the members of the National Bar Association to carry out our election protection work nationally to ensure that every eligible American, but particularly African Americans who have borne the brunt of voter suppression for so long, are able to exercise their voice in our democracy this season. We're about a month away from marking 7 years since the Supreme Court issued its devastating ruling in Shelby County, Alabama versus Holder. Every day since the court issued that horrendous ruling, we have seen relentless levels of voter suppression and voting discrimination all across the country. And those problems are now only compounded by the significant barriers that voters face in the wake of the current pandemic. And at every level, we know that these issues have a disproportionate and starker impact on us, on Black people. We know that African Americans are dying at higher rates, are being infected and hospitalized at higher rates. And it makes it really critical that we redouble our efforts to beat back the voter suppression that we're up against this season. Many of you may have seen new reports regarding True the Vote and other hostile opponents that have really energized this season. There are reports that some of these groups intend to recruit former cops, former members of the Navy. They intend to deploy these folks to serve as poll watchers. We're going to have to fight tooth and nail to make sure that every stage, from the voter registration phase all the way up to voting on election day, that we are working to beat back those opponents. And we can beat them back by using our voices, by sounding an alarm when we encounter voter suppression in our communities, and by going into court, as Judy Brown-Dianis observed, to fight back and to stand up for Black voters. I'm going to stop here, but I'm excited about our election protection efforts, excited for the National Bar Association to really help anchor our work this season, and thrilled to be a part of this distinguished group of panelists here today. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you so much for your presentation and your comments. We will move on, and I will give an appropriate introduction to our NBA President-elect, Tricia C.K. Hoffler. Tricia shares the NBA's voter rights and election protection efforts, and it is through this work that she has begun to forge critical relationships with various voting rights teams, as is evidenced by the representation on this panel today. Hoffler's legal acumen as a dynamic and effective trial lawyer has been perfected over her extensive legal career, including the time she served as partner to the nationally renowned lawyer, Mr. Willie Gary. CK serves as founder and CEO of the CK Hoffler firm, an Atlanta-based international law firm where she brings a diverse set of skills and talents to the practice of law, representing plaintiffs in a myriad of practice areas, including civil rights and employment discrimination. A service-oriented attorney, Ms. Hoffler's community involvement includes active participation in pro bono law clinics, extensive lecturing on First Amendment matters, women's issues, children's concerns, and international matters. And so I welcome and appreciate being able to serve under President-elect Hoffler, as well as obviously President Robinson, and I look forward to your presentation.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Cynthia, for those kind words and for that wonderful introduction. I was just kind of sitting and enjoying it, but it is voting rights and election suppression and all of the issues related to that have always been a priority for the National Bar Association. Always been a priority. It's one of the areas where we always excel because our membership has always been very engaged in protecting the right to vote. You've heard from various speakers where people have said this is the most important election of our lifetime. I think we say that every time. But this really, truly is because we're operating in a COVID era. And we are able to see how the administration and how various leaders are protecting citizens and the impact of COVID on the African American community. So there's no time like the present for the NBA to step in with its coalition partners to make a difference. And we have done that. I talked about Gertrude Rush, where we were going to unveil a robust program for election protection where we would utilize Black lawyers throughout the United States. we launched a 50-state initiative. So this was not just focused on a particular region, because we felt it was critical to not just represent people, represent our voters in the big urban areas, but in those areas where people really feel intimidated and where you see voter suppression really play itself out because people feel that there's no one to help them, to protect them when they go to the polls or when they seek to register, when they encounter irregularities, when they're sent home, or when their ballots are provisional ballots that are never counted. So the NBA lawyers felt it was critical for us to fill that space with our coalition partners, and we did. Then COVID happened. So with COVID happening, it just meant that we had to adjust our strategy. We had to adjust and face the reality that we're going to have diverse ways of voting in November, diverse ways of voting in the primaries. We have primaries that have been delayed, but justice delayed is not justice served. We have to, as National Bar Association lawyers, with our partners, fight, because we are really fighting for our lives. It's not just the lives of the least of these. And we certainly, as the NBA, as a social justice organization, we do fight for the least of these. But we're also fighting for the survival of our Black lawyers, our Black institutions, and our coalition partners. Black and brown people across this nation are being suppressed in a major way. And this is impacting, and it will continue to impact their ability to vote in November. So we've got to step there, and we have stepped there. So when we have our coalition partners that are present today on this call, Transformative Justice Coalition, the State Infrastructure Fund, Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights, the NAACP, the Advancement Project, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and Rainbow Push, we know that we mean business, and that's the message that we're sending. That's the message that we're sending. And so we have also worked with the NBA health law section. COVID is a health crisis. The NBA, Rainbow Push, and the National Medical Coalition formed and teamed up and formed a manifesto, a health manifesto to address COVID. That's a big part of our effort here today. Why do I say that? We have a healthcare issue. We need our Black doctors in our community helping our membership, helping our communities to deal with COVID. Just as we need our Black lawyers dispersed throughout our communities to help with the voter issues. They go hand in hand. And we need organizations such as Rainbow Push, who's always been there, who've always been in the space of registering voters and protecting the right to vote. And in fact, with Reverend Jackson joining us today, it really is fortuitous of how we are able to embrace our leaders who got us to this point. They fought and they marched so that we, as members of the NBA, would have the ability to protect people's right to vote. So it is fortuitous, it's coming full circle. That's why this election is critical. At the NBA, we've built an election protection team. While I'm chairing the committee, my senior advisors and the people that I rely on most are none other than Barbara Arnwine, who you will hear from, and Tanya Playhouse. They're extraordinary in this space, well respected, and that's why you're going to hear from them. My vice chairs are Akua Kopak and Carlos Moore. They are my left and my right hand, how shall I say? They give me the sea legs every day to be able to do what I need to do in the election protection space. So I'm excited. I am energized by what NBA lawyers and our coalition partners are doing and will continue to do. We will be creative. If we have mail-in ballots, there's a lot of work that lawyers can do. But remember, we're going to have diverse ways of voting. Some people will vote in person. If we have absentee ballots, there's a role that the lawyers can play because we've got to ensure the integrity of the process. If we do not ensure the integrity of the process and step up to the plate, this country will go back and revert, I fear, to a time and place where we were killed and sacrificed because we merely just wanted to vote. So we can't afford to sit back at home and to lay on our laurels, not during this critical time. So thank you for this opportunity. Again, Reverend Jackson will come in at some point. I am energized. I thank Alfreda Robinson, our president, for allowing me to be in this space as the chair of this important effort for the NBA. And I thank the membership of the NBA for electing me as president-elect, because I will be president in the next couple of weeks, couple of months. And this is the #1 priority for my administration until the election is over in November. Thank you.
Reverend Jackson.
Thank you, President.
Reverend Jackson. We see Reverend Jackson is on the screen. It gives me a great pleasure to introduce Reverend Jackson. I have been his lawyer, the organization Rainbow Pushes lawyer, for the past 32 years. And it has been one of the greatest services I've had as a lawyer. And so as chair of your board, Reverend Jackson, I just want to welcome you to this effort. Rainbow Push is one of our coalition partners. And we'd just like you to bring us some greetings if you could.
I'll tell you, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Became a personal lawyer for 32 years, and now the president-elect of NBA, and you're making sense all the way. I thank you so much for all that you do, CK. We have a challenge now to mobilize the vote, and then lawyers have to protect it and count it. For example, all these graduations have no man a voter card. Our kids should be early on fighting for Pell Grants, early on fighting for state scholarships, early on fighting. And they can fight with the vote. They have the right to fight for votes, they have the right to elect officials, they have a right to be on juries, and all that comes with it. So I want to thank the lawyers, because this time around, I'm signal already, he plans to interfere with this election. He may try to delay it, to confuse people. He may try to intimidate people, but this crowd, they're not going down easy. Don't assume this is in the bag. But Rainbow Pushes are with you night and day. I want to thank you, CK, and the lawyers, because one thing, we live in our faith, we need you. The 55 boycott was not about boycott. The 55 boycott was testing the 54 legal decision. The big picture was not the boycott. The big picture was the 56 legal decision said the 54 was valid. All we've gotten since the time comes out of that legal decision. Civil Rights Act 64, Voting Rights Act 65. All we got stands on that proposition. So we live in our faith among the law. We want to thank the lawyers. The role you play in the services you provide. Thank you very much. God bless you.
Thank you, Reverend Jackson.
Thank you, Reverend Jackson. Okay, so we will move on with the panel. We have definitely received our marching orders in the framing of the issues, and Reverend Jackson was absolutely a welcome addition to our agenda and has helped us further move this program along. I'm going to now introduce Barbara Arnwine, who is a treasure within the civil rights community. She is the president and founder of the Transformative Justice Coalition and president emeritus of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. Barbara has become internationally renowned for contributions on critical justice issues, including the passage of the landmark Civil Rights Act of 1991, as well as the 2006 reauthorization of provisions of the Voting Rights Act. She was largely responsible for the 1995 Conference on African American Women and the Law, which attracted over 1,000 attendees and addressed the problem of women who face both racial and gender discrimination. Following thousands of complaints of racial intimidation and disenfranchisement in Florida during the 2000 presidential election, Arnwine became a leader in the Election Protection Program, which by 2008 was one of the largest pro bono programs in the nation. She led the Lawyers Committee in creating the Disaster Victims Assistance Program after Hurricane Katrina in 2005 and preventing the eviction of over 250,000 displaced families from hotels and shelters until alternative housing had been provided. As a prominent global and domestic leader in the civil rights and human rights community, her international advocacy of civil rights has taken her to South Africa as the head of the Electoral Observers Delegation, to Guantanamo Bay to investigate the condition of Haitian refugees, and to Beijing as head of a delegation to the Decade of Women Conference and NGO Forum. where her efforts contributed to adoption of a platform for protecting women who face multiple forms of discrimination. Barbara, we welcome your comments.
Well, thank you. And thank you, everyone. I really appreciate being part of this panel. I want to thank, President Robinson. I want to thank President-elect Hoffler, and I want to thank all of the panelists for, all of our efforts in uniting and continuing, I think, one of the most critical traditions, and that's the tradition of Black lawyers fighting for our people and fighting for our rights and fighting fervently for the right to vote. In this era, we got to really look at everything that we're doing differently, because now we are in the era of what I call virus voting, the era of virus voter suppression. It is a new reality for us. It is, voter suppression is not, but doing this in the backdrop of a very serious global pandemic is different. Clearly, our people dealt with it during the 1917, Spanish flu and other times, but this time we have a whole different set of circumstances and realities that are facing us. So I just want to start by saying, I wanted to give some history on the fight against voter suppression. And I'm going to share my screen for just a minute with everybody. And I'm going to show you a timeline that I put together. I can't, let me see if I can get it to show. I'm trying, I'm not new, I'm not the best at all of this, but it may not.
Ms. Arnwine, you're on mute. If you can unmute yourself.
Unmute myself. Can you hear me now? Can you see me? Can you hear me?
We see you when we hear you.
Okay, great.
We don't see your screen.
All right, well, that's okay. I can't share my timeline with you, unfortunately, because it didn't work. But in any event, what I wanted to just point out is that the fight for voting rights is not new. It started the minute we put foot in this country. The minute we were drugged here and enslaved, Black people said we need every bit of our rights and we need to be full citizens. And this battle for voting rights has been a long fought battle, and it has been, very severe in our lives. And it has meant, as was mentioned, the sacrifices so much. What I wanted to point out is that the most important things in this fight was not only the Reconstruction Amendments, the 14th, the 13th, 14th, and 15th, that gave Black men the vote, not only the fight by Black women for the 19th Amendment to be betrayed and not allowed to vote, not only the whole Reconstruction era that we went through and the lack of Black representation from the South for over 70 years after the expulsion, after the farewell address by George White on the floor of Congress. Not only the fact that we have had to endure, setback after setback, but the one constant and every bit of that, from the Okauchee massacre to the Wilmington insurrection to all of these fights for our right to vote, despite voter suppression, the one constant has been our fight, has been our unrelenting commitment to making sure that we could vote and to fight for that vote. So the 1965 Civil Rights Act was, such a momentous occasion for all of us coming out of Selma, Reverend Jesse Jackson's great work with Dr. King, just everybody who's brought us this far. But it was in the modern era that Judy Dianis Brown talked about, that we realized that we have to do a whole new paradigm after the debacle in Florida, where 90,000 Black people were told they couldn't vote because they were, quote, formerly incarcerated persons, and that was just untrue. They were false matches. It was a terrible debacle. It decided that race by taking Blacks out of the equation, and nobody wanted to stand up for them in the parties to make sure that people had the right to vote, and were not willing to, quote, look at the racial dimension of it. So what we did in 2001, because of all the floods of calls and all the faxes and everything that happened in the light of the Florida debacle, that we recognized a couple things. One is that it wasn't just Florida. We saw a whole lot of machinations that had taken place all throughout the country. Deceptive practices, people being told that they were going to be arrested if they voted, all kinds of problems that we saw. We saw unequal treatment at the polls, disparate treatment, all kinds of issues. And that led us to create the Election Protection Coalition. I was there for that creation. Now Judge Anita Earls, who was at that time, the director of the Lawyers Committee's Voting Rights Project, set up what is still the 866 Our Vote hotline. She created that in our office. She and I, talked about the strategies. We started working with the People for the American Way, PFAW, where Tanya, comes out of that great organization. And we were able to also, unite with the National Coalition for Black Civic Participation with Melanie Campbell and others. And we created election protection with Advancement Project and all kinds of groups. And what we've been doing since then is fighting in the trenches for the right to vote. We've been talking about this RNLA. The Republican National Lawyers Association has announced that they're going to help coordinate these 50,000 vigilantes at the polls to challenge Black and brown voters. We know that the lawyers on the other side are doing everything they can to suppress the vote. We know that we got lawsuits up the kazoo all over the country right now, fighting for the right to vote. And we know that they're going to do what they do. But our job in the election protection is to be on both the offensive, making sure that we're promoting the right to vote, and to be on the defensive, to make sure that we fight any effort. Let me be very clear. There's 50,000 vigilantes at the polls. We dealt with this before. We dealt with this in Louisville, in Kentucky, where they planned to bring thousands of vigilantes, white people armed to threaten Black voters, and we stopped it. We dealt with it in Harrisburg, at the Lawyers Committee, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where they said they were going to bring all the vigilantes into polls there. Black polling sites, and we stopped it. We know that this can be done, but it takes all of you who are listening to become part of this network, to use these unique skills of lawyers that only we have, that only we are board certified to actually exercise. It takes us in this space. It takes us to fill the breach that is left in the gap of voter suppression and the gap of voter denial. So it is so important in this time that you join us, that you become part of election protection. Black lawyers have to be at the forefront of this battle, not peripheral, not sideline, not extra, but the forefront. So I really hope that as you look at this, when I created the map of shame in 2011, 2 years before the Shelby case, let me be very clear, that the modern era of voter suppression took off in 2011 following the 2010 election. And within months, 40 states had already proposed 100 voter restriction laws, the modern day era of onerous voter ID, cutting back early voting, restrictions on students, getting rid of same-day election registration. All of these efforts were at the forefront in 2011, and Reverend Jesse Jackson helped me to publicize the Map of Shame that started educating people. And the Black Bar, the National Bar Association, took this up. And we started, doing this work, so intensely to educate people about this fight and the fight in the states. Well, we're going to have to do that again because we know, going into this election, that voter registration. Do you know that since March, voter registration in the nation is down 90%? That's because the Department of Motor Vehicles and public service agencies have been closed. They account for 50% of all voter registration in the country. Voter registration campaigns and drives haven't been held. So we have extra work to do to back up these organizations to outreach in a time of virus voting. So I want to, just point out that all of these things. Lastly, and this is my last word, vote by mail. You know that I just put out, there's an article that CBS just put out where I'm quoted. And I helped to, really make sure that article got published to point out to us that vote by mail is not a panacea for Black voters. In fact, it actually historically has suppressed the Black vote. And if you watch what's happening already around this country, that's how it's being used. And we got to be very clear. It works very well for white voters, very poorly for Black and Latino and Native American voters. So I just want to highlight to you in this moment that we have to make sure that there are voter options. People are talking correctly about the fact that you got to have drive-up voting where people can drop off their ballots, drive-up voting where people can vote curbside. You don't hear a lot about that. You need to. It's one of the better options out there that nobody's promoting. You got to make sure that the postage on the mail ballot is prepaid, or you will knock out, as we saw in Wisconsin, thousands of voters for the lack of proper postage on the ballots. You got to make sure people sign their ballots. A lot of our people don't. And in those evil states where they still make you notarize ballots, have witnesses, that's a real problem. We got to take those down as much as we can, those kind of barriers. So there's a lot that we can do, a lot that we can say, and at the on-sites, we got to make sure that the on-site voting places are safe. Some of these machines, the untold story is that some of the machines that are being used are unclean. You can't clean them between voters effectively. And you got to make sure that you get a demonstration that they can do that so that we don't see what we saw in Wisconsin, that we saw in Chicago, that we saw in other areas where voters are getting sick because they voted in person. And our people are going to vote in person. Some of them have to vote in person. So we got to make sure that we're protecting their safety. So there's a lot we can do. Thank you so much for having me. I will make sure that I get that slide that I was trying to share with everybody to you. Thank you so much for the honor of serving. I look forward to uniting with everyone and making sure we have the strongest, most robust, most powerful election protection initiative with Black lawyers in the NBA ever. Thank you.
Barbara, thank you so much for your comments and for providing the historical framework for formalized election protection. So thank you. Thank you so much for that. We're going to move on to Tanya Clay House, and I want to reiterate that I am giving very brief bios, but I would appreciate those who are participating to take the time to really get to know the work of the panelists that we have here because their bios are extensive. We're going to move on to Tanya Clay House, who is the Senior Program Officer for Voting Rights at the State Infrastructure Fund, and she manages the voting rights portfolio, including all of the national litigation and communications funding. And she also serves as CEO and co-founder of Clay House Consulting, Inc. Ms. House is the former Deputy Assistant Secretary for P through 12 Education in the Office of Planning, Evaluation, and Policy Development at the U.S. Department of Education. And as the Deputy Assistant Secretary, she made recommendations on a host of policy initiatives as the leader of the P12 team. Prior to this appointment, Ms. House served as the director of the Public Policy Department at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, and formerly served as the Public Policy Director at People for the American Way. She was also instrumental in the development, implementation, and management of the nonpartisan Election Protection Coalition that we are hearing so much about. And I would like for Tanya to begin her presentation because she has a lot of information that she would like to share with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. It is a pleasure to be here with everyone today. And I want to acknowledge that, can everybody hear me? Okay.
Mhm.
All right. I want to acknowledge and thank President Robinson for being so gracious and allowing us to move forward with this webinar in such a quick fashion. I want to acknowledge President-elect C.K. Hoffler, who has been instrumental in trying to make sure that we realize this vision, even despite, our virtual convenings right now. And I also want to uplift Akua Kopak, who is the chief of staff, who really has been extremely helpful in trying to make sure that we are organizing this this webinar and moving things forward. So what Cynthia did not mention is that she is also the vice chair of the Civil Rights Law section. And so I would acknowledge and uplift Cynthia, who is also, I believe, chair of the ABA's, or I don't know, you've got a whole bunch of other titles that I can't even remember all, but I know that you are a leader in the ABA in their civil society and social justice section, I believe, as well. So right now, I come to you on behalf, not only as the Senior Program Officer for the State Infrastructure Fund, but also as the chair of the Civil Rights Law section of the National Bar Association. So I'm holding two hats right now. And I say that because I want to bring forth a lot of information and uplift some of the information that Barbara has already given to you regarding election protection, but also let you know that on multiple levels, we are working to support and uplift you all as you engage in this election protection effort. I'm working not only on behalf of the NBA, but also in my day job, working with the State Infrastructure Fund, where I do manage the voting rights portfolio, as well as working with our litigation collaborative. And so I think that will be a unique opportunity to ensure that the NBA is kept up to date and informed, and also incorporated into a lot of the moving pieces that are happening. And we want to make sure that we are bringing all the information to you and engaging you in the right manner. What I'm going to do right now is just start out from where Barbara left off just a little bit, and then I'm going to move quickly into just a couple of slides that I have that I want to outline to show you some information about what's happening in the States. And then I'm going to leave it to both Derek and Marcia to also get into the nuts and bolts about what the specifics of how you all as Black attorneys can engage in election protection. So as Barbara indicated, we've been in this fight for a long time, and it has been something that has evolved throughout the years. The Election Protection Coalition, it has been comprised of hundreds of organizations, and Black lawyers have always been instrumental, because one of the things that we want to emphasize is that we need you to be there for your community. It's always extremely important to see and be with those that you know and that you can trust, and that you feel have your back. And we believe that the NBA can provide that type of fundamental support network to voters as they're trying to cast their ballot, particularly in light of the fact that we are now under a pandemic, and people are very scared, and they need to be reassured about the integrity of their ballot. And that's exactly what the Election Protection Coalition is there to say. We're there to say that we've got your back, and that in fact, there is so much more that we want you to do in order to make sure that the reality that we're facing right now for COVID-19 actually does change. In order to change that reality, that means you've got to exercise your power, and that is by voting, and by making sure that you have leaders in place that actually understand and respect your rights as a person to exist in an equal and in a free fashion, and to be able to have all that you need moving forward. So the Election Protection Coalition has evolved throughout the years in order to support voters. And one of the ways is we've had to evolve in making sure that we're dealing with all the voter suppression and deceptive practices that Barbara has mentioned and that we'll hear more about. The National Bar Association has tried its best to ensure that Black lawyers are incorporated through this program. And we want to this year make sure, particularly, that you're incorporated not only in the in the initial, in the right before the election, but throughout the year. And that's why we're here today, because we're starting this out. It's May, and even we want you to actually engage all throughout the year, but particularly even now, so that you can understand what's happening in your states. The coalition does engage in multiple fashions, and throughout the year, one of the ways we engage is through working with election administration officials. And so right now, I'm going to actually share my screen so I can talk a little bit about that and some of the activities the Election Protection Coalition does engage in. Here we go. Can you all see my screen? Okay. And so, as I said, I want to talk a little bit about what it is that we want you to understand when it comes to the state structure of election protection. As I said, in my hat as the voting senior program officer at the State Infrastructure Fund, I help to fund a lot of the organizations that are engaged in our voting rights work. And we are sending those funds early on, and we are helping to move those funds in order to make sure that our communities have the support that they need. But in order to fully understand and make sure that we are providing that support, we've got to know what's happening on the ground and know where the gaps exist. And that means that in order to do that, we embarked on a survey of the field in order to understand, okay, where do the gaps exist? How is it that we can engage more? And I'm sharing this with you so that you understand that all this information that I'm giving to you is something that the NBA now has at its disposal as we're trying to incorporate attorneys into the field and making sure that we can figure out the best way to create a better infrastructure on the ground. So let me go to kind of the activities. The things that we assessed are the things that we want you to think about, because these are the things that the election protection program typically engages in. Obviously, we have our poll monitors that you hear about all the time. And then there's you as the lawyers, recruiting you as legal professionals to be trained and support our voters at the polls. There's also the poll worker recruitment, the outreach to election administrators. And that is something that we need you to engage in as well. And I know Marcia will speak to this, but this is a year-round effort, because we need to know what's happening what's happening in terms of providing of different options for voting, vote by mail, early voting, expansion of early voting, expansion of a whole bunch of other options. We need that voter education, need to verify that voters are actually not being purged from the rolls. And so ultimately, we're also going to need you to help us as we realize that a lot of states are engaging in nefarious acts by purging voters from the voter rolls. As we heard about in the 2018 elections, we know over 1 million voters were purged that ultimately we know detrimentally affected the ability of those running without being partisan to actually have all of their voters be able to cast their ballot and get them counted. And then of course, there's also the rapid response that we'll need everybody to engage in order to respond to voter suppression tactics. So this is some of the snapshots I just wanted to show you that kind of goes to, and it helps us to understand who's working on the ground. And these are the places, these organizations, and through the NBA, we'll also work to embed you with different organizations, depending on your state, who are engaging in election and protection activities, because we want to make sure that you are doing all the work that you possibly can if you are able to assist in different ways. And so this kind of gives you an idea of a snapshot that we've created for Georgia, in which we show all the counties that have been covered, that are being covered currently through election protection efforts, as well as the different organizations you'll see here. The Common Cause, Fair Fight, the Georgia Coalition of Latino Elected Officials, New Georgia Project, Pro Georgia, all of these organizations, Georgia NAACP, this should have the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda. And there's also the national organizations that you have here. Many, are some of them on the phone, including Advancement Project. And, I know NAACP nationally is also part of the organizations that are in Georgia, and of course the Lawyers Committee. So we want to give you an idea of types of groups that actually exist on the ground, as well as, where the counties are, so you can understand where it is we need you and the types of activities that are covered. And so we've done this for, all the tier 1 state, well, a lot of the, I say tier one without being partisan, so not saying battleground states, but we've done this for a good portion of states, and they're going to do these for all states. And so once again, I just wanted you to see that this is information that we will provide and we will continue to share. And I will support the effort that the NBA is engaging in to help embed you the best way so that we can make sure that we're protecting the vote and protecting our voters as they go through this pandemic and they're fighting for their lives to maintain their homes, their livelihood, and all that is necessary. But trying to reassure them that in order to make sure that we get out of this pandemic the right way and don't go back to this, that we have to reassure them that their vote matters and it counts. So with that, let me stop sharing my screen. I wanted to just end by saying, you know, we really appreciate the ability to come to you to speak right now. This is relatively early, and at least for engaging with the NBA, and I'm appreciative of that effort, and I'll continue to support this effort on both fronts so that we can make sure that we have the necessary task forces developed in order to move forward and help make sure that the NBA is the leader and continues to be the leader that it can be. So thank you again, and I turn it back over to our wonderful moderator, Cynthia Swan.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you so much for your presentation and for all the work that you're doing in this field. And I'd like to move on now to Derek Johnson. Derek Johnson is a longstanding member and leader of the NAACP and currently serves as president, guiding the association through a period of re-envisioning and reinvigoration. He previously served as the vice chairman of the NAACP's National Board of Directors. Mr. Johnson, President Johnson, is a veteran activist who has dedicated his career to defending the rights and improving the lives of Mississippians. As state president of the NAACP Mississippi State Conference, he led critical campaigns for voting rights and equitable education. He successfully managed 2 bond referendum campaigns in Jackson, Mississippi that brought $150 million in school building improvements and $65 million towards the construction of a new convention center, respectively. As a regional organizer at the Jackson-based nonprofit Southern Echo, Inc., Mr. Johnson provided legal, technical, and training support for communities across the South. In recognition of his service to the state of Mississippi, the Chief Justice of Mississippi Supreme Court appointed Mr. Johnson to the Mississippi Access to Justice Commission, and the Governor of Mississippi appointed him chair of the Governor's Commission for Recovery, Rebuilding, and Renewal after the devastation of Hurricane Katrina. We want to welcome President Johnson and look forward to his comments.
Good morning for those of you in Central Time. Good afternoon for everyone else. I want to thank the National Bar Association for putting this together. I believe I have a slide deck. If so, please advance the slide. If not, I will proceed. NAACP part of numbers. I'm going to skip by that. Of course, we're 111 years old, 2,200 units in 47 states. Next slide. So the Wisconsin crisis, as we can picture a few weeks ago what happened in Wisconsin, it was a travesty. We forced people to choose between their health and their right to vote, and that's something we should never do. As we look forward to the upcoming primary elections, there are more lessons to learn as we prepare for the November election cycle. For the NAACP, we've invested resources over the last 2 years to identify how do we increase voter turnout. The number one method to fight against vote suppression is increase voter turnout, along with all of the legal strategies that many of you will be employing for this upcoming election cycle. And in that process, we've identified 11 states and districts within those 11 states where if we move the needle of Black folks who are already registered to vote by 1 to 3%, we can impact the outcome of the election. Our success here would impact 190 electoral votes. It can impact several state legislative races along with congressional races. And so it is a key for our pathway to making sure that the upcoming election reflect the needs and interests of the African-American community. Move to the next slide. And so in that, in order for us to be successful, we know that as we move individuals to the polls, we have to protect their ability to exercise an effective ballot. There are going to be huge barriers in place the conservative right. They are organizing aggressively. They have the courts on their side. And so we are going to be confronted with the reality of another election without Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act for the jurisdictions that were previously covered, a federal bench, both circuit, district, and Supreme Court that's not friendly to our interests. Even if we get a good decision on the district court level, ultimately it will end up in one of the circuits, and we don't have many friendly circuits. And just recently in the Sixth Circuit, they overturned a good decision saying that a child does not have the right to literacy. So we are faced with courts that simply don't believe that children should have the right to literacy. So they won't think that we should have the right to cast an effective ballot. With that, our goal is to partner with many of you on the call and other legal organizations to ensure in the target areas and those target precincts that we put forth the necessary that's required so our community can cast an effective ballot. It's a very targeted, focused program. Everything else is rhetoric. If we're not really focused in this election cycle, if we have not pre-identified where we should be doing the work, we'll be running around the country and not being effective. This is one of the most important elections. I've heard that all of my life growing up, but I think now is really true. The fact that we're sitting in the midst of a public health pandemic demonstrates that it is true. The result of us sitting in this pandemic is not the crisis of the public health. It was the decisions of the policymakers, particularly the president who sits in the White House today, and that is a result of the 2016 election. And in order for us to get back to what should be a better normal, we must impact in November. And so working with local election administrators to ensure that whatever local rules and the administration of the elections is going to be key. Jamal Watkins, who's on the call, who's headed up this effort, he can share with many of you where the target areas are. With that, we are planning to do an assessment to determine if those who are responsible for the administration of the election in those local areas reflect the values that we have, and wherever possible, we can work with them. And those who will not reflect our values, we need to identify, because that further narrow down where we should target our efforts in terms of an election protection process. It is not enough just to do a scatter shot or go to the traditional places. We really need to be focused and target on how we carry this out. Let's go ahead to the next slide. And so with that, we began to take a look at the public opinions of voters right now. How people are feeling about this moment of COVID. It's important for us to do this so we can make sure that our messaging is consistent with the wills and the sentiments of African Americans across the country, as opposed to impose what we think people think. It's been our effort to go out and engage what people think. So this is the second in a series of public opinion research that we're doing in partnership with various groups. This one happened to be with the African American Research Collaborative, so that we can continue to get the pulse. We are back in the field again to get another set of research. And again, we are very targeted in the areas that we have mapped out with a data science team. So we are working in the right places. There is no reason for us, unless there's a local elections, to go to a California or New York, because those are areas that's going to turn out how they turn out. It is really important that we are playing very hard in Milwaukee, in Racine, Wisconsin, in Michigan, in Georgia, in the other states that we have identified, because that's what's going to make the outcome, the difference in the outcome of this election cycle. Move to the next slide. Was that the last? Okay, there we go. So trusted messengers. We learned in this moment. Here are the trusted messengers in this moment. Why is this important now? Sometimes we have to identify who's the best person to speak to the community so that the community can hear us talking. One of the experiences that I have, starting very local and now in this national position, is to understand that the egocentric method of organizing is ineffective. It's not long lasting. That we have to empower people locally to understand their ability to be the voice that the community is listening to, but also understanding that different times require different voices. And in this time of public health crisis, what we are learning is that our community want to hear from Black nurses and doctors. They want to hear from our federally funded public health clinics. They want to hear from Black elected officials who live in proximity to them or their elected officials around what's taking place with this pandemic. Part of our strategy with the NAACP is empower those set of individuals through a series of webinars, teletown hall meetings, and other Zoom gatherings so folks can hear the message that's important to them in the areas that we target so we can gather their information and continue to communicate with them. And so that's what this slide list here is. Who are the trusted messengers in this moment of public health crisis? Next slide. Certainty of voting. This is the breakdown of what people are currently saying in terms of the November election. This becomes really important so that we're not preaching to the choir. Far too often when we organize these efforts, we're talking to the converted. They're going to vote anyway. Our goal is to begin to narrow down who are the people who are going to vote. How do we back that up with data in our VAN system based on their vote history, and then identify individuals who are qualified to vote, who are registered to vote, and move them to the people that we need to get to the polls, which make up that 1 to 3%. It is through a relational organizing model. How do we get the people who live in the same communities who we know going to vote because their vote history based on the data we have show that they're going to vote, to talk to their neighbor? Because people will succumb to moving in a direction based on their social environment and their neighbors. And so part of our relational organizing strategy is to move the needle in that direction. Next slide. Voting policies. This is another good, when considering the impact of COVID on people's ability to vote, which of the following governmental policies would they support? And this is the ranking here. There is 75% people support vote by mail in our community, which is important. Absentee balloting is already in place. That's a high supportage of that. But our experience also have taught us that if you have vote by mail or absentee voting alone, it is not enough. It will create another mechanism to create vote suppression or vote buying. And vote buying schemes is something that's very prevalent across the South. Just last year, we had to have a new election in North Carolina because there was a vote buying scheme taking place that which was revealed, and we had to have a new election. I know that all too well how that works. So as we have the mix of voting by mail, we must also be putting in place how do we have same-day voter registration, and how do we ensure that individuals vote in person under the right circumstances? And that's part of that locale by locale conversation with election administrators to make sure we create the best conditions within that state law parameters possible so people can execute their ballot in person if that is a desired approach. Next slide.
President Johnson, that's your last slide.
That's my last slide. So all in all, our goal is to increase voter turnout because that is the #1 method to overcome vote suppression, while we also work with many of our partners to enforce the current laws on the book or be the watchdog so that people are unable to suppress our vote locally. Now, if we do this together and we're very targeted around the areas we need to be in, so that we're not in an area where we may have a large African-American population and they're going to vote in large numbers, and that's our comfort zone, we may need to go to some different areas. And we also we're considering the fact that over the last 20 years, people have moved a lot. The reality of what we see in Atlanta is no longer the Atlanta of 1995, because many of the Black folks in Atlanta after the Olympics was pushed out of the city and they in the suburbs and further past the suburbs. That's the same thing for Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. will not be the Black chocolate city anymore. And so much of our work needs to be in places like a Prince George's County or Montgomery County. That is the exact same thing for the city of Detroit. The city of Detroit is 80% Black, but Metro Detroit is where the new political power is. And I can go on and on and on with those type of examples, because what we have done in the past should inform us as the baseline of information, but it also should allow us to understand that things have progressed, people have moved, strategies have changed, and we need to adapt to the moment and be metrically driven and focused so we are outcome focused based and not process based. Thank you all for the brief moment.
President Johnson, thank you so much for your presentation. I'm certain that the presentations, I'd like for the participants to know that presentations will be available, and this has been most informative for all of us. I think that we now need to move on to Jamal Watkins, who serves as the Vice President of Civic Engagement at the NAACP, leading the association's efforts to maximize the African American community's participation and representation in our democracy. I'm going to cut short Mr. Watkins' very, very impressive resume and bio, but to say that he has worked in several distinct areas, including politics, campaigns, communications, education, human resources, and fundraising, and has played key roles in voter rights, election protection, and voter mobilization and engagement. Jamal?
Yes, thank you, Cynthia. I'm going to be very brief. As you heard from the NAACP leader, president, and CEO Derek Johnson, and you've heard from Barbara Arnwine and Tanya Clayhouse and Judith Brown-Dianis and our host, the NBA. We're excited about the work that we are doing in these troubling times. And there's 4 categories that we're going to operationalize with you all moving forward. The first bucket is litigation, where we will continue to lead, leverage, and partner to make sure that the courts are working for us and on our behalf, and also collecting stories from the front lines, because as we all know, if we don't tell the story and litigate properly, then we can lose out in a way that we've never seen before. We also know that there's an effort around democracy expansion and protection. So think voting rights advocacy, democracy advocacy campaigns have to continue. And of course, in these troubling times, voter education. We know that elections are upside down in many states. And so when we think about the primaries, the rules are changing every day. And so we have to make sure we stay on the forefront of educating and connecting our communities. And then, as you all know, the NAACP is powered by volunteers. And so we have local units across the country, whether it's Georgia or Alaska, California or New York, who are ready to do work around organizing a volunteer local counsel program. So to all the Black lawyers out there, we need you. We're going to need your time and energy to make sure that you can do voter protection and election protection work, not only during the primaries, but during early vote and on election day in November. And then non-legal coordinators, folks who are going to be doing poll monitoring and poll working, and also just thinking through how do we continue to lift up the coveted 866 Our Vote hotline and have command centers in a virtual reality is going to be key. So glad to hear from Kristen Clark and Marcia in regards to this work. And then at the end of the day, because we're entering into a new normal, a lot of you are going to experience this, which is virtual learnings, virtual trainings, and dare I say it, CLEs online. And so as we continue to partner and continue to work together, just know that the NAACP, our leadership, our president and CEO, our chair, Leon Russell, our vice chair, Karen Boykin-Towns, and our board members and units are standing with you all to make sure that we protect the vote, but also expand democracy so that we're fully included in all things voting, but in all things democracy. So I'm going to stop there and thank you all for this time. And we're, again, excited to partner and know that we have a journey to go towards November.
Jamal, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your presentation. And I'd like to have the panelists take a look at the questions that are coming through. And so if you're able to provide answers, that would be good. And if not, we can, if just in case we don't have enough time at the end, it would be nice if those questions could be responded to. And we will go on now to introduce Marcia Johnson Blanco, who is the co-director of the Lawyers Committee Voting Rights Project. She manages the project's programmatic and advocacy portfolios, which include leading election protection, the nation's largest nonpartisan voter protection program. We've heard a great deal about that program today. And she oversees the work of the National Commission on Voting Rights, promoting election reform, ensuring minority participation in the redistricting process, and ensuring that those with felony convictions regain their right to vote. Marcia?
Thank you, Cynthia, for that introduction. Just want to confirm that you can hear me all right.
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks. So first, I'd like to thank the National Bar Association for hosting this very important webinar to talk about how Black lawyers can engage in the fight for voting rights and to work with the Election Protection Coalition. I co-direct, as you heard, the Lawyers Committee's Voting Rights Project and have been working on election protection since 2004, along with Barbara Arnwine and Tanya Clayhouse. And I must say that the first training I did when I started election protection was with the NBA affiliate in Florida to prepare for the 2004 presidential election. So we've had a very strong partnership with the National Bar Association from the very beginning, and really look forward to continuing and strengthening that partnership. As you've heard, we are facing an unprecedented election cycle where how we vote, the rules, and when we vote are changing in real time. And just to give some examples from recent primaries, as you heard, the Ohio primary was initially to be held on March 17th, and it was canceled immediately the day before the election day. And there was a lot of voter confusion. There were people who did turn out to vote. The election was changed to vote by mail to April 28th, but voters still had to apply to get their voter absentee ballots. And then there was confusion about the rules to get the ballots back. And those who didn't get their ballots in time, their only option was to vote provisionally at their election official's office on April 28th. We can't let that happen again in November. As you heard, in Wisconsin, voters had to choose between their right to live and their right to vote. And we also had voter confusion around absentee ballots, where voters, because of litigation, voters were confused about what how they needed to vote. And in Wisconsin, you require a witness signature. And at first the court said you didn't need a witness signature, and then on appeal it said you did. And there were voters who were caught in that confusion. And unfortunately, as you saw, the long lines showed up to vote in person at the risk of their health. Also, I just want to note that we've had, you've heard about the unfriendly courts we're facing. And more as we seek to address some of the barriers to the vote in the courts, we're finding that we are not as successful as before as President Trump begins to fill the judiciary with his nominees. But one of the things that's really an important lesson that we've learned as well is that a strong record helps to counteract this inclination by judges not to support voting rights. And so us getting started early now is important to build and do the work that's necessary to ensure that voters can vote on election day. You heard a bit, I spoke about the public health crisis. Barbara Arnwine mentioned the decrease in voter registration options. Absentee ballots, as you've heard, with regards to vote by mail, that's now prominent, but it can't be the only solution, because we are seeing now that our elections infrastructure is not built to accommodate substantial number of voters voting by mail. Voters, either the rules require specific excuse to get the absentee ballot, or when you do get the absentee ballot, the deadlines don't really match the ability for voters to get the absentee ballots on time. and to return them in order for them to count. So we, Tanya mentioned engagement with election officials. It's really important that we engage election officials now to address some of these issues that we're finding that have come up during the primary elections. There's a lot of voter confusion and understandably fear about voting at this time. It's up to us in the roles we play in our communities to provide the necessary voter education and to give them the tools and to arm them with what they need in order to be able to vote and, most importantly, have that vote count. So how do we do that? With election protection, we offer a suite of resources that are supported by the vast coalition that makes up election protection. So we have the suite of hotlines that serve not only English-speaking voters, but Spanish, Asian languages, and also Arabic languages. We will have field programs in 30 states this year, and I will next show you a map about where those field programs are going to be. I mentioned the voter education, really important. Data collection. The data that we get from the hotlines helps to inform our advocacy, both legislatively, administratively, and in the courts. Legal advocacy has become more and more important. We've had to file election day cases more and more. Tanya and I were involved, and Jamal in Georgia in 2018, where we had to bring a case on election day. And then we got a positive order to extend voting hours because of the problems voting earlier in the day. But then we had to work with, and we worked very closely with the NAACP, who had monitors at the polls to tell people to stay in line. Your voting opportunity has continued. And then having to push back against the election officials, the election workers who were at the polls, who wanted to close the polling hours despite the fact that we had a court order saying that the poll hours were extended. And so that's where you would come in to help us in such an effort, not just on election day. Before election day, we brought litigation against officials who were rejecting absentee ballots because they determined that they were signature experts and were rejecting absentee ballots disproportionately from African-American voters because they said the signatures didn't match. We had to go to court right before election day to get those ballots counted. It's not enough, the issues that we're facing is access to voter registration, being able to stay on the voting rolls. Then now when we're moving to vote by mail and absentee ballots, ensuring that voters get those absentee ballots, that they know how to fill them out correctly so they wouldn't be rejected. We just had the recent special election here in Maryland where the state mailed ballots to the voters in District 7 in the congressional race to replace late Congressman Elijah Cummings. And even so, we had significant rejections of those absentee ballots that were submitted by voters because they didn't follow all the rules needed to ensure that the absentee ballot will count. And so being able to cure your absentee ballot, being able to provide the information you need so the absentee ballot will count is extremely important as well. And so we need you to join us now to build the infrastructure that we will need to address all of these issues that I just outlined to ensure that the voters, particularly the voters in our community, are able to cast a ballot and have that ballot count. So I'm sharing a map of where we're currently planning to have field programs. And as part of the field programs, what we would like to do is to recruit and train a core of attorneys to help in that legal advocacy and rapid response that I mentioned. The reason we were able to bring election day litigation is because we were able to identify local counsel in jurisdictions so that we can bring the election day litigation. And what we've learned from past practices as well is that we need to have the pleadings ready. When we get the complaints, be ready with the declarations. so that we can get the information to the courts and be able to move very quickly. We've been successful where we've been able to move quickly. We've been unsuccessful when it took us too long to put the case together on the day of or right before the election day, and the court said, well, it's too late now. And so we do have the models of success that we would like to build on and work with you on to build that core of attorneys who are ready to go on election day should we need that assistance. And so I went over that really quickly because I want to make sure that we have some time, a little bit of time at the end to answer questions and next steps. But please join us. We look forward to having you volunteer, promote the resources of election protection, and share the information with your community. And of course, you know, we all need to make sure that we vote in every election between now and November 3rd. Thank you, and I'll end there.
Thank you, Marcia. And I want to thank all of the panelists for all of the incredible presentations. I know that you felt rushed to try to get it all in, and I know that those who are participating were really eager to hear everything that you had to say. We have a couple of questions. We do want the participants to know that any questions will be answered. Information about the panelists will be posted and provided for follow-up. And one of the questions that seems to be of interest is hearing that vote by mail or absentee ballots could possibly suppress the vote. They've heard that a couple of times and they're trying to understand how that could be suppressive. So this has been directed to President Johnson, and I'm certain that anyone else who would like to join in could do so.
Well, I can take that
Please.
on. Absolutely. First of all, I want people to just, look at the Wisconsin election. There's been a lot of information that's come out of it. The overall participation rate for absentee balloting was significant and very high. And it worked really well for white voters who were progressive and for progressive white voters. And everybody heard that in Wisconsin, there was this big increased turnout. What you didn't hear was that in Milwaukee, the participation level for African Americans was down 30%. 30%. And you can have that dichotomy. You can have white voters voting at incredibly increased rates and African American voters voting at really significant decreased rates. Why? A couple factors. African Americans, we have more mobility than white populations. We move more often. We have 50% of all homeless people in the United States are Black. We have these targeting of our jurisdictions for all kinds of maladministration. I was just talking with people in Baltimore this morning. In one district, 40,000 people don't know if they're going to be able to vote because of the mail ballots being all messed up and they're not getting it. So there's a lot of maladministration problems that exist. In Philadelphia, 29% of all Black households have no internet access. In the state of Pennsylvania and in many other states, in order to get an absentee ballot, you got to request it. You got to apply for that ballot. Most of that application process is done online. If you don't have internet access, you're in trouble. You can, of course, write and mail, but how do you even know in this environment when churches are closed, etc., and there's very little outreach, that you have to apply for a ballot? So what we're seeing in Pennsylvania is precisely what we saw in Wisconsin. The white rate for absentee ballots is up significantly. The Black rate is flatlined, very low, and so is it it's worse for Latinos. So, we got to understand that there are these structural barriers. Another barrier is, think about it, 8.7% of all registered voters are on inactive lists throughout the country. That's 18 million voters. The majority of those are people of color, Black folks in particular. And if you're in some of these states, if you're on the inactive list, when they say they're going to mail a ballot to everybody, they don't mail ballots to inactive list voters. If you're on that inactive list, they're not going to send you a ballot. They're going to require that you cure whatever problem exists that has you on that inactive list first. And people don't even know that. Nobody sends them a notice, a letter. Nobody reaches out to them by mail, by radio, by anything, telling people that they need to do that. So these are problems. It knocks out millions of our people. The other thing is, a lot of problems with the absentee balloting is the requirements, the notarizations, the witnesses, the correct postage, the signature being in the right place, the right set of, envelopes. All these issues are confusing to voters. And if you don't have severe high literacy, it makes it even more difficult. So these are just some of the barriers, some of the reasons why we see, absentee balloting. Even though our people said in the poll that they are, willing to do it, the reality is that if it's not doable, it becomes a real problem. And what I fear is that we're going to see what happened in Wisconsin. People just said, okay, too few polling places, can't figure this absentee balloting thing out. I'm just going to not vote. And remember, the tragedy of 2016 is that the voting for that presidential election by African Americans, that is, our ballots that were counted, were down at a minimum 7%, over 1 million less voters. At a maximum 11%, 2 million voters. These are our realities. If we don't get, voting options, if we don't come up with the best systems possible, if we got to take down for the general elections, we cannot have an application process. If we do that, it's going to destroy the Black vote. And let me be very clear, when I say destroy the Black vote, I'm not talking about for president. I'm talking about down ballot. You can see whole city councils changing their racial complexion if you don't have Black voters participating. You can see mayoral races going crazy. I mean, these are serious issues, and we can make a difference in our advocacy. We got to take down the application process. We got to make sure that any mail ballots are sent directly to voters. We got to address that inactive list problem. We got to deal with, the safety at the polls. All of these things we can do. None of these barriers are insurmountable. We just have to correctly advocate and make the jurisdictions do what they need to do so that in this era of virus voting, that the voting options are there for our people and that they're accessible.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. I think all know that we have run over our time, but we are able to stay open enough to answer some of these questions if you choose to do so. As long as the panelists are available to stay on, then that would be fine. If President Johnson is not on, Jamal, would you like to try to field a couple of these questions?
Yes, I can cover.
Okay. I think Barbara has just answered one. I don't understand and don't quite know a lot about the situation in New York in terms of the voters and the canceling of the New York State presidential primary. And so if you could respond to that question generally, I know you cannot give specifics, but generally that would be very helpful.
I can give specifics, actually.
Oh, okay. I didn't want to put you on the spot.
In the great state of New York, we know that the primary race, and this is in most states when it deals with the presidential, because the candidates on the Democratic side have all dropped out, if you will, or suspended their campaigns, and the majority of them have endorsed the presumptive nominee, Joe Biden. When you think of a primary race on the presidential side, it's really Joe Biden technically running against himself, and Donald Trump technically running against himself on the Republican side. There is some valuation that folks say, well, I still want to vote for Andrew Yang or Bernie Sanders. Governor Cuomo made the decision that the costs in terms of the risk to the budget, the health and safety of poll workers, all of the money that would take to run an effective presidential primary for folks who are pretty much running unopposed did not make sense. And so he went ahead and said, let's cancel the elections for the presidential based upon that clause of individuals running unopposed. He lost in the courts and they said, no, you still got to have something. And so there will be some primary activity happening, especially for places that have down ballot activity. The NAACP and the state conference of the NAACP in New York did not make this a fight because fundamentally we believe that we want to make sure that all voters are protected, that they don't have to choose their health and safety over voting. And so if the state and the courts would have agreed and said, hey, this doesn't make sense, then we would have stood by that decision. But because the court and the states don't agree, we are supportive of the movement forward, which is there has to be something in terms of vote by mail, but it has to be done in accordance to CDC compliance. So it's a little bit complicated, but fundamentally, there are a lot of places where it's Joe Biden running against Joe Biden and Donald Trump running against Donald Trump. And so if we don't have to risk lives, if we don't have to force the issue of running a robust election, that's a debate for some folks. And for us, I think we're standing on the side of let's make sure we look at the holistic perspective and think through what makes most sense to have an inclusive, fair electoral process. And in the case of New York, the courts have spoken.
Thank you, Jamal.
Cynthia, could I just jump in and say
We
something?
have a
really
question
quickly?
about how do you volunteer for election protection? Absolutely. Tanya?
Oh, yeah, no, I was just going to say, also in response to the question about vote by mail, I just wanted to add, I know that we are talking about Black lawyers and election protection, but we also have, Black lawyers that also are part of the Native American community, that are part of tribal communities. And in terms of a voter suppression tactic, I wanted to address that specifically, because we know that on tribal communities and reservations, they don't have access to postal service. And so that is in fact a voter suppression tactic. And that is what I think President Johnson and a number of us have expressed in different ways. So I just wanted to add that component of that, because I know that we are talking about helping all of our communities, and we are a mixed community. And so I think we need to be responsive and make sure that we are protecting all voters, including our Native American and tribal communities.
Okay. Thank you for that. I'm going to ask one more question and then
If I can answer,
and
the
CK,
question, how
I was going to,
if people want to be registered for the election protection effort, you can go to NBA Voting Rights at nationalbar.org. I'm going to repeat it. NBA Voting Rights at nationalbar.org. And you did see with all of our coalition partners, they also gave you their websites and gave you the ability to be able to reach out to them. But for the NBA, if you're interested right now and being a part of this effort, and these are our coalition partners, so we're going to work together. Again, NBA Voting Rights at nationalbar.org. In addition to that, this is the first of many seminars that we're going to have, and we're going to continue this through our annual convention in July, and Madam President will address that. There's going to be another opportunity to be trained and to be active, very active in preparation for the national elections in November, because we're going to continue this series. There'll be multiple opportunities at our virtual conference in July. You'll have another opportunity. And then I made the determination that my first conference, the Wiley Bratton Conference, will be in a battleground state, which is in Michigan, in Detroit. And we are going to have simultaneous training, this is our plan, in multiple states at that virtual convention, so that, because that's going to be a month from the election, or actually a few weeks before the election, and so that you will still have that last ditch effort ability to help with election protection.
okay, well, thank you. I'm going to take the liberty of answering the question that asks whether or not churches, since they're opening up, whether churches and the NAACP and the Lawyers Committee can all partner together to provide internet access to obtain ballots. And I'm not going to answer that, but what I want to do is I want to refer that to others to answer. If it's not something that you can answer online right now, we'll make certain to get in touch with the judge and give her an answer at a later time. I want those online who are giving questions to know that we will get back in touch with you with the questions. The election protection numbers and email addresses that have been given, including that President-elect Hoffler just gave, will be provided. As part, when you look this webinar up online, you will have all of that information as well as contact information for the presenters. At this point, we want to have President-elect Hoffler give whatever final closing comments she wants to make, if there's something beyond what she's just said. And we also want to give President Robinson the opportunity to close out, because she has been very helpful and willing and open to having this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just briefly, NBA, we are an organization, a social justice organization. We're social justice engineers fundamentally at our core. We stand on the shoulders of great leaders, great lawyers who've made a difference in this country, the fabric of this country. It's now up to us to take the mantle and lead and make sure that our communities have the right to vote. It's just that simple. And make ourselves available, especially not just on election day, but before. Get the training, be engaged, be informed, and figure out how you can be helpful and bring other people in as well. So again, thank you so much. I thank President Robinson for giving me this opportunity to serve as chair. I thank my senior advisors, Barbara Arnwine and Tanya Clayhouse. I also thank my right and left hand people in this effort, Akua, who's also my chief of staff, who was instrumental in pulling this together, and Carlos Moore as well. And most importantly, I thank the NBA for all that you do, because we serve with pride. And this is going to be our best, and I concur with our Barbara Arnwine's comments, our best election protection effort ever. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Ernie.
I want to thank all of you, certainly our President-elect C.K. Hoffler, who has been putting all of this together all year, and all of those who have assisted her. She knew when I asked her that I felt she was the best person last year to lead the NBA effort. And as you can see, that we are in for this. And the simple charge I gave her was I wanted a 50-state strategy. You can see she's absolutely implemented that, and all of it is going to be folded out. I want to thank all our coalition partners. We are excited to work with you all again. And as she said, the NBA is a group of lawyers. We're social engineers. We come from the Houstonian part of the bar that says we're supposed to be doing good and helping others. And so we're looking forward to this. We're looking forward to the other webinars that have been referenced that we need to do as we roll up to this bigger national election. But we've got some primaries, we've got some challenges, but we don't just want to show up, get off the bus, and all of a sudden on election day, there we are. We need to do so much beforehand. This has been extraordinarily informative. You all are the experts, and we're looking for more of this in the future. And of course, we ask all of the participants to join all of these organizations, all of them. The NAACP doesn't charge that much, and the others to become members. Go on and stretch yourself a little bit. And we ask you to join the National Bar as well, so we can support this effort and be leaders in this effort at www.nationalbar.org. But my sisters and my brother, thank you, and my brother who got off the call, thank you so much for this afternoon, and have a good rest of the long, wonderful weekend. But stay safe and in place. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.